It's time to get caught up on book reviews for the last 2 weeks. My little sister was in town visiting me, and we went to the Noah Kahn concert and just had our last sister sleepover before she becomes a mom in October. I'm so excited for her. But yeah, I didn't have time to do my book reviews. So here are my thoughts on the 10 books I read in the 31st and 32nd weeks of 2026. Clean Slate by Brianna Labuskes is the first book in the Olive Hunt series, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited. This is a thriller following Olive, and she is a crime scene cleaner, and she soon discovers a pattern in her recent cleans and finds herself diving headfirst into an investigation to find a serial killer. I love the setup of this story. I think that crime scene cleanup just sounds like one of the most disturbing jobs, and I was hooked right away. I found Olive to be a complex and very interesting character to follow. She has a haunting past and just very odd intricacies that made her very easy to root for. That being said, I don't really like where this story went. It became clear pretty early on that there is a wealthy family that is involved in this story, and they become a pretty primary focus, and I just really don't like wealthy people and all of their problems, and so that did take me out of the story, unfortunately. Ultimately, what kept me reading was Olive's character. There were points throughout that I wanted to DNF, but I was curious of how everything would pan out for her as a person, and so I decided to continue on. Overall, this book just ended up not being my vibe, but if book 2 ends up going in a different direction and we're not focusing on rich people, then I will definitely be tempted to pick it up because I did find Olive to be very compelling. I rated Clean Slate 3 stars. The Women in White by Sarah Pekkanen is a dual timeline paranormal thriller. We have a 1960s timeline where a group of women who have special abilities vanish after participating in parapsychology and ESP experiments. And then in present day, we follow a caretaker named Riley as she starts working for this older woman named Betty and soon starts to uncover what happened to the women all those years ago. Typically, when I'm reading a dual timeline story, I gravitate towards one timeline over another, but in this case, I felt like I was equally invested in both timelines. This was just such a unique read. In the past timeline, we have these 4 women and they have these special abilities, and they're brought together to participate in these experiments. We explore themes of adhering to the patriarchy, manipulation, and power imbalances. And then in the present day timeline, we have an outsider perspective, the caretaker that we're following, and I found Riley and Betty's connection to be really endearing as Riley's trying to teach Betty about getting with the times and ultimately solving what happened to her friends all those years ago. This timeline explores themes of breaking away from the shackles of the patriarchy, reclaiming one's life, learning independence, and the long-term effects of trauma. I thought this was an absolute emotional roller coaster of a read, and I absolutely loved the overall message of resilience and women empowerment. Now, I will say this was less thriller forward than I was initially anticipating, but if you can get on board with it being more of a historical fiction read that has paranormal elements and eventually turns into more of a thriller, then I definitely think this one will be worth your time. I absolutely loved it, and I rated it 4.25 stars. She's a Doll by Barbara Truelove publishes on September 8th, or you can get it right now with Aardvark Book Club. This is a darkly comedic revenge horror that follows Lucy, and she has been unalived by a guy named Kyle and finds herself now living in the body of an 18-inch porcelain doll. She is now out for revenge against Kyle, and so she seeks the help of a fellow Kyle hater, and together they come up with a plan. This is what I would classify as girly pop horror. While it handles some hard topics, it approaches them with whimsy. It's fun, it's chaotic, it's ridiculous, it's filled with feminine rage, it's emotional, and it's perfect. I just had an absolute blast with this book from start to finish. Some horror is scary, some is fun. This one is fun. Doesn't mean it's any less of a horror book than other horror books. I know that some people subscribe to that ideology, but I certainly do not. I only have great things to say about this book. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I rated it 5 stars, and I will accept no criticism of it. I then did a segment of best or worst horror books, and I read The Devil Crept In by Anya Alborn. I'm rating it 4.5 stars. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. If you want my thoughts on this book, you can go ahead and watch that vlog. I also attempted to read another book, but yeah, DNF'd it. That's not happening. What the Forest Devours by Elaine Villar Madruga publishes on October 20th. This is a Caribbean Gothic horror, and it follows a community of women that raise their children to be food to be sacrificed to the forest. I was really interested in the premise of this story. I love that this is an allegory of women giving up so much to survive in society, and the symbolism being literal sacrifice to portray this. There was some really great commentary in this that struck a chord with me and had me all in my feels about being a woman in a patriarchal society. It would just really sneak up on me out of nowhere, and I really appreciated it. But then on the flip side, I would get very discombobulated and disconnected from the story because of how vulgar it gets. Call me a prude, but I just don't want or like explicitity in my books like this. This is also a very bizarre and fever dreamy type read. While at first I found the prose to be very interesting, it just started to feel like fluff. Same goes for the plot itself. At a certain point, I was just like, okay, I get it. It just felt a little bit repetitive. Overall, this was an interesting and weird, yet uncomfortable and ultimately repetitive story. I definitely appreciated a lot about it, but ultimately this just didn't really align with my taste. I'm rating it 3 stars. My Twin Sister by Alicia Dykema is available on Kindle Unlimited. This is a thriller following Jenny, and 18 years ago, her twin sister Grace vanished during a storm. In present day, their father has passed away, and at the funeral stumbles in Grace after all these years. Of course, everybody is totally shocked, and Jenny's world is turned completely upside down. To make matters a little bit more complicated, she is now married to Grace's ex-boyfriend. I'm sorry, this was ridiculous and not in a fun way. I don't need my fiction to be based in reality, but this just felt like one of those movies you'd see on daytime television back in the early 2000s. It was just absolutely cheesy in my opinion. You definitely need to suspend disbelief in order to enjoy this, and sadly, I just could not. I will say though, it is short and easy to fly through, and so it does get points for that. I don't want to dog on it too much. I didn't hate it, but I definitely didn't like it either, so I'm rating it 2 stars. These Walls Remember by Del Sandine is a gothic historical fiction haunted house story that follows siblings Mickey and Delilah as they inherit a house from a distant relative. Their plan is to sell the house, split the profits, and go their separate ways, but the house has other plans. When Delilah starts exhibiting some very odd behaviors that only get worse, it becomes clear that something beyond their control is occurring. This was so good. It's like a mix of The Haunting of Hill House and The Good House by Tananarive Due, with a dash of The September House by Carissa Orlando. The trauma that lives within the walls of this home just manifested in such a haunting and disturbing manner that several times it gave me visceral discomfort. It's eerie, unsettling, darkly atmospheric, and so tense. It explores themes of trauma, grief, dysfunctional family dynamics, and memory. These siblings have such a complicated relationship, and they are pretty much estranged at this point, and the house starts throwing these unimaginable obstacles in their way, and they have to work together to overcome them, and it just had me in my feels. It kept me engaged, it was psychologically tormenting, has great character development, and all around it was just superb. Now this book does jump around with timelines and POVs, and it can get confusing at times. It also has a mix of pacing that can feel a little bit jarring at times, but I walked away from the story feeling like I really just loved it. I rated it 4.5 stars. The Hill in the Dark Grove by Liam Higginson is a folk horror book that follows a couple of elderly sheep farmers who discover some ancient buried ruins on their property, and as they're unearthed, so is a supernatural force. This is a slow burn. Imagine an elderly man is telling you a haunting story, and then he goes off on tangents of backstory from things of the past, and you'll kind of get the vibe of how this book felt to read. Now, I will say, I personally find that vibe very endearing, but I don't think this will work for everybody. This book also does a classic thing that many people, and myself included, typically don't enjoy, which is telling rather than showing. Like I said, it kind of feels like someone is telling you this story. It doesn't really feel like you're riding along with the characters as they're experiencing these things, if that makes sense. The vibe of the story is pretty immediately clear, and if you don't like the way that it's told, this probably won't be for you. This book is mostly atmospheric vibes and sadness. We're following Carwyn and Rianne, and they've been married for a very long time. They are now down on their luck, they're in financial ruin, and things just continue to get worse for them. It's a very bleak read. It's funny because I'm saying all these things and it sounds like I don't like this book when I actually really did. We get Welsh folklore, we get dread, we get this very atmospheric and very clear imagery of this Welsh farmland that just absolutely had me immersed. If you like slow burns, and I do mean slow burns, then you might enjoy this one, especially if you like folk horror as much as I do. I rated it 4.25 stars. The Unknown by Riley Sager is a horror thriller, and it follows an actress named Marin who just landed the lead role in a film depicting an 100-year-old mystery. In 1926, a group of women living in a commune on an island in Vermont vanished mysteriously. The only piece of evidence was a diary from one of the disappeared women, leading people to believe that these women had some sort of seance that went horribly wrong and released a supernatural force. In present day, these actors have to go back to this island where these disappearances occurred. They're cut off from the rest of the world and things go horribly wrong as it seems that history is repeating itself. We get past and present timelines. The present timeline, we are following the actors, and the past timeline in 1926 is done via diary entries. And it does one of my biggest pet peeves when this type of media is used in a book, and that is recounting events verbatim. I'm sorry, I don't need my fiction to be based in reality, but nobody writes out dialogue in their diaries. That just doesn't happen, and I don't know why, but like, It really bothers me. Like, I just think that it could have just been a past timeline and recounting things verbatim. I don't know why it had to be from the diary specifically. Okay, pushing past me being nitpicky, I loved the witchy vibes, and I loved that we're having this movie set that's reenacting this old event. I just always love when things are happening at kind of parallels throughout a story. We have themes of manipulation and industry corruption, toxic men, blind trust, and the dangers of ruminating on the past. I think this book did a really good job with the setup and the atmosphere, and that's kind of it. It just felt like to me that this book was trying to do too many things, that it just got a little bit out of hand, a little chaotic, and ultimately just didn't deliver on much. Though I will say I did enjoy some of the ambiguity. I thought the characters felt underdeveloped. The twists were too frequent, too much, and ultimately pretty predictable. And though the points being made by the end of this novel were very solid, they felt very overshadowed by the chaos that was going on that needed to be wrapped up by the end of the book. I was ultimately entertained, but I walked away from this book wishing I had enjoyed it more. So I'm rating it 3 stars. The Sleeping Sisters by Jennifer Giffen follows a mother named Fortuna, and she is desperate to escape this family curse, and then she wins the lottery and she moves her family into a new neighborhood. 20 years ago in Albuquerque, a serial killer known as the Reaper just wreaked havoc on this place. And now in present day, the killings have begun again. We follow a detective named Jeanette, and she is seeking justice for the ghost of her murdered cousin. The case is turned on its head when a body is discovered on Fortuna's property. This story weaves together the Chicana indigenous legend of the Headless Woman reimagining and a riveting story of an investigation into a serial killer. This is the second book I've read by Jennifer Giffen. The first one was Salt Bones, and I was absolutely obsessed, and this one is no different. I loved it. We have a very unreliable main character, and it's paired with these supernatural, paranormal, and magical realism elements that I just thought were done so well and had me absolutely captivated. With themes of generational trauma, dysfunctional family dynamics, folklore, violence against women, feminine rage, land history, and setting symbolism. This story was just absolutely breathtaking. It's surprising, it's full of suspense, very multi-layered, haunting, emotional, and absolutely riveting. I will say it can get kind of confusing, especially with how many moving parts there are and trying to determine what's real and what's not in the story. I walked away from the story going, wow. Just wow. I really loved it. I rated it 4.75 stars. Thank you so much for watching. Please drop me a comment and let me know your favorite books that you read in the 31st and 32nd weeks of 2026. My favorite in the 31st week was She's It All by Barbara Truelove. And my favorite in the 32nd week was The Sleeping Sisters by Jennifer Giffen.